As mentioned, data commons, data sharing, and data marketplaces. I will talk really around the data sharing perspective of that and how that reaches into data marketplaces and other data publishing activities around the catalogue. So I'm from Link Digital. We're one of the co-stewards of the CKAN project. We have been established since 2001, so we're in our 20th year. We've been working based out of Canberra for most of those years. More recently, we've gone more global, and we have staff across various countries at the moment. We're still quite small. It's about 22 of us at the moment. But since 2013, we've been implementers and contributors to the open source project CKAN, which is a data management system. And that's really been like a refreshing retake on what we were prior to that as a digital agency, building websites for government communications projects. And we've kind of shifted really nicely and gradually into this data management space. So I'm the CEO or the executive director, I more often call myself. I'm the delegate or the co-steward, working with another company, Datopian, and the delegate there is Rufus Pollock. And he's one of the folks who started CKAN right at the start in about 2006 to 2009. It kind of emerged out of the open knowledge movement, which is kind of an NGO-based movement around data sharing. So at the moment, you know, as I said, we've been involved since about 2013, but we've been heavily involved. We helped to organise, in association with the International Open Data Conference, CKAN conferences in 2014, 16, and 18. The 2021 was going to be in Africa, but that all got cancelled, as lots of things were. And in the tech team, which is a core group of folks who do the mergers and the main commits for the projects, we've had a chap in there, Sergey, from our team, who's been one of the leading committers since 2018. So we're quite heavily involved. Where we talk about open data, and excuse me if I say data versus data or data versus data. I am an Australian. You may have worked that out from my accent. Recent market signals, which are seeing an opening up or like a third wave of open data initiatives. On the left-hand side, I've got the data-led COVID response. I guess a whole bunch of people in the audience here will have had that experience as well. There's been a lot more awareness of data being very important, not just for strategic business planning, but tactical, actionable, in the field, as it were, activities. The Global Data Barometer is a re-emerging assessment process of initiatives worldwide, which came from a very successful project that was around 2013 through to 16, the Open Data Barometer. So that being re-emerged and reimagined, as well as another indicator that there's going to be more attention on this space around data publishing. Historically, it's been around open government data, but there are sector-specific initiatives as well that are emerging around, let's say, climate change or energy data, things like this, and also corporate fiscal data, reporting data, things that lead towards regulated industry. I mentioned the third wave. If you do a Google on that, there is actually the Gov Policy Lab have put something out that's pretty good reading. So if you're looking for something there. And in the Australian market here, there is something by the Office of the CIO, which is the foundational four, and that talks about data competencies within government agencies and the four pillars of that. From a little bit broader field, Microsoft have got an open data campaign that's been around for more than a year. I'd say they're a little bit late to the party, but when they come to the party, usually you know that it's really galvanized as a movement. The Linux Foundation have a climate finance foundation, which is around open data and open source technologies, which will support, if you read kind of into the intention of it, risk mitigation for asset managers and like very large long-term investments in managed assets and things like that. And most recently, amongst those two, the most recently about the last two is the Pentagon data decrees. The Pentagon put out a strategic statement around what they think data should be for the defense forces in the US, and the top 2 to 3 were all around data sharing. And the securities, the SEC in the US as well, Securities and Exchange Commission, have also made public statements around how important data is in supporting strategic and tactical initiatives in support of fighting climate change, and how more and more corporates will be expected to disclose their dealings in that space, how they affect or disaffect the environment. These first two slides are really just kind of mostly around Link Digital and our perception, but that leads into what CKAN is all about, I guess, and the context here. So for us, the assessment of market drivers or business issues around open government data or the government technology market, we're seeing a lot of projects that are driven by digital transformation. So it's improvement of service design or citizen-centric services in government programs. There's certainly a transparency initiative around open government, that governments can be more accountable through open policies, open programs, open reporting, and in conjunction with that is open data, which in an ideal world would be leading towards government as API or evidence-based policy, things like that. There's also in the government tech market, cross-agency and cross-jurisdiction collaboration accelerated even more in light of COVID initiatives. And just reiterating that third wave of public sector data sharing is the formal title for that document that I mentioned earlier. Now, in the enterprise technology market, sector-specific smart city and IoT, whether you call that innovations in urban design or it's the IoT-driven devices. Corporate regulation and transparency and risk management, again, is a big driver. AI and ML data pipelines, the concept there being, I think that's driving a lot of work in a lot of areas, but around the catalog, it's about having an understandable overarching view of all data assets in an organization, not just a warehouse of that, but effectively like the published meaningful reason for that data collection to exist, so that AI type workloads can traverse that and do essentially a meta-analysis for it, or more specific AI type approaches can be trained to delve deeply into a particular data set and then be used use that for training purposes. So making those, I guess you'd say, semantically more rich, not necessarily using triple stores or linked data, but more meaningful data management practices, data publishing practices that are more machine readable. And CKAN is aligned with that. But more generally in that enterprise tech market, it's data for offensive data for competitive advantage. So I kind of think about data as, is it going to be helping an organization be more competitive in the market, and that is more like offensive data, or is it defensive data around risk mitigation? Is it going to protect them from ill effect of broad societal or corporate changes? And those are the two broad categories on which I think there's a lot of movement in this space. So our competitive position with regard to CKAN as a co-steward is, as a co-steward of the project, we have a lot of visibility and opportunity to drive the project. It is an open source category leader for open data platforms. Traditionally, I've got the line there that it's competed against products such as Juno, which is PHP based, Open Data Soft, which is a French initiative or company. It's open source from the API up, but closed source essentially, or platform based below that. CKAN which is kind of like a Drupal based, Drupal PHP content management system, which built a distribution to simulate a lot of the CKAN user journey, and has also inherited the API methods that CKAN uses. So it's sort of like a follower of the CKAN project, as it were. And in the US market, there was a startup, Socrata, ended up being bought by Tyler Technologies. And you know, I'm not sure where that's at the moment. We don't see a lot of competition with that. The target markets that we look at as an organization, all government levels, national, state, country, city. There's a scale of budget depending on what level of government you're working at or how important that is. There are data-enabled government sectors. So again, the big ones are things like energy, climate, resources, scientific. Later on, I've got some examples of where we've worked in those specific areas. Innovation in smart sectors, so smart cities, IoT, AI, ML, research, things like that. And then emerging is the corporate sector. Excuse me. That's better. So now about CKAN. So this is really a pure play demo of what CKAN is all about. It's mature, extensively adopted tech. That's kind of the gold data standard. Out of the box, it's a cool framework for creating more customized systems. and it has a powerful API as for both the data catalog, but also getting into the data sets and the resources beneath that as well. And it's extensible in a whole bunch of different ways. I'll go through that a bit more a bit later. I should mute when I do that. For government, it's used by, at the moment, national and regional government organizations throughout the European Union, Americas, Middle East and North Africa, Asia, Oceania. For enterprise, it's been adopted by organizations such as in sectors such as resources, energy, pharmaceuticals, finance. And it's around publishing and managing internal data assets. And think about that publishing step that humans would want to do for some sort of reason within an organization, that they want to have a canonical understanding of why it was published, some metadata around it for the purpose of future access and discovery. And that's really what it's all about. Some of the open data programs at the moment that are out there, the Government of Canada, NHS in the UK, data.gov, they're big ones. And I've got a listing, there's about 576 on a project that we built called Data Shades. So I'll share that with you towards the end as well. This is a bit of a stretch. So what I want to talk about here is kind of like the 3 ways you can see how CKAN operates. As a data portal, it's kind of like a front end for access and discovery. And in that space, it can operate as kind of like a marketing and communications based web experience management platform. Just like a content management system, you can tweak the front end, you can tweak the user journeys around how people access and discover and use data sets, data resources and all sorts. As a data catalog, then you're thinking about the internally to the organization, how they manage their data inventory, how they go through data governance processes, how they go through workflow processes to make decisions about actually publishing artifacts, how they version those, how they look at dependencies between them, things like this. And then as a data repository, this is where it's sort of a stretch, but really as a repository, it's more about its connector into other information management systems, or its ability to harvest from or receive inputs from other information management systems. So it's really more of a bridge or a nice ETL landing page, landing point for what I'd call more traditional data lakes or data foundational data platforms. Another way I often talk about is within an organization, we'll have the foundation data, but then the insight layer data is more intentionally based. I would call that the natural place for CKAN to sit. That's where all those intentional data sets are housed as a result of data preparation activities. So some of the features, it does have that API. So it's a full API in terms of traversing through the full catalog, performing actions like the full CRUD level applications, so create, read, update, delete on data sets, organizations, groups, resources that are associated with data sets, etc. In terms of federation or sharing, it's like extensions for syndicating from one CKAN portal to another, so you can create quite cool networks of data sharing through that, and harvesting from other portals as well. So you can, it's one way or the other, you can federate, as it were, between data portals. Extensions for CKAN are in various areas. There's resource view extensions for data resources. You can extend the workflow and the user interface, like themability and such. And there's a whole bunch of those on GitHub and other places developed by the community. Data store is mostly around tabular data sets. So a procedural way to take from something that's been cataloged as a tabular data set, so it's a CSV file, and then ingesting that directly into a data store and intelligently working out how that would be stored as a retrievable, queryable resource in its own right. So turning what would be a CSV file into an API retrievable endpoint, as it were. So that's what data store is all about. And interestingly, if you saw the news about Tinybird, which talks about column-based database, I can't remember the DB that it's using, but CKAN could easily be extended to use either a row-based database or a column-based database for its data store, and you could kind of easily customize it like that and allow the data publisher to make a decision about what kind of database would be used for the data store. You can see I'm slightly excited about that, or interested in that over the last 24 hours, just looking into that. So themable, yes, like any website, as it were, you can theme the front end. You can do nice aesthetic integrations with other information management systems. In terms of the metadata, the schemas can be developed and aligned with standards-based schemas. So DCAT. DCAT is a quite popular schema for data catalogues. So that is almost without exception used by most of our customers. Permissioning systems around user access and control, so you can associate users to organizations, and then by default, based on the access authority to that organization, they get it for data sets for where they have admin access, member access, or editor access, or just registered access or anonymous. But essentially, you can have some granular level access controls around data sets and resources. And just most recently, CKAN 2.9 was updated with even more fine-tuned or availability in the core to fine-tune the permission access. And that should turn into feature sets such as in the way you can do with Dropbox, where you just very uniquely decide to share a particular resource with a particular person. And that can be made, you can build syndication, subscription models against things like that. So the use case of creating a data mart or a data marketplace. Visualization, I mentioned the resource views. So for any resource, once you go down to from data set to resources attached to data set, you can customize and create new resources. And then once they've been applied to the platform, custodians of the data sets can decide what visualization to use with what data set. In terms of managing the data, really that's around the data custodianship. So you'll see a bit of that in the future and in the slides ahead. And versioning, just by default, the versioning is around the metadata statements for each data set and the general sort of specifics around resources. So when they're updated, when they're changed, and things like that. So you can do rollbacks around things like that, or you can at least map the awareness of things like that within the platform. So the next three slides, if there's slightly techier people on the call, these might be more interesting. It's kind of saying the same thing as where I had the 1, 2, 3. At the top level in this diagram is a concept architecture. The top area is what I call the data portal. It's the aesthetic integration. You've got CKAN in the middle there, and in our projects, the example I'm going to bring up in a second, we've got Drupal for content management. So it's aesthetically integrated with CKAN. And there's a Terrier.js, which is a geospatial viewer and sort of browser in-browser platform for spatial data sets. And then below that is the data catalog. And we actually do have a somewhat physical separation between those two, and quite a few of our projects will have separate CKANs and take advantage of syndication to push from the data catalog layer, as it were, allow the organization to go through all of its data workflow processes or data management processes, which could include data enrichment processes. So preparation on data resources while they're in line for publishing, or quality control checks. And then once everything has been ticked, then it would go through and syndicate to the public level, or the more public level, or as a published artifact or a published data set. And similarly, you can then have much more secure control over the data sources you're harvesting from. You can remain within the network, as it were. It also allows for hybrid architectures in terms of infrastructure. So you can have a public cloud for the data portal itself, but then use on-prem infrastructure for the data catalog. If you're dealing with supercomputing sort of workloads, which are creating petabytes of data, you can have that kind of awareness of data holdings in your data catalog, but then you have a subset of that at the public layer to reduce network costs and things like that. And then the last thing at the lower level, this is a very simplified view of things, but when I think about infrastructure, I just think about the core components of network storage and compute, and where those need to reside can be carved up and sort of like built into the architecture of CKAN. If you want to store some things on Azure, if you want to store some things on AWS or on-prem, based on policy rules or other sorts of rules, and you can work that out. And we've seen lots of workflows, I guess, or business models like Snowflake, for example, how you can optimize the compute associated with data preparation applications in that tool chain of moving from source of data through to data warehouse. There's a lot of optimization you can do within the way you can tweak CKAN as well. I thought I'd break that down and sort of say, so in areas of work, areas where people can get involved in CKAN or see it integrating with other projects, or the way we see it and the opportunities we see with clients. In that top level with the aesthetic integration or the data portal, there's workloads around user interface and user experience, design and development with our clients, consulting and such around content management, or even the work to generate content in association with that communications side of things, marketing and communications in terms of old school, like working at campaigns or working on community initiatives. And there's obviously development services around how you pull those things together. Then at the data catalog level, there is certainly a whole range of work that can be done with different partners or different people within the scope of the project around the ETL or ELT, and other tool sets or other tool chains you can use. Moving along that in that space where I've kind of marked out as data management or data enrichment, there's a whole lot of scope there for AI and ML, or even, it doesn't have to be such a buzz-orientated term. It can just be some processing scripts to determine things like the temporal range of a data set and then plug that directly into the metadata rather than have to query the temporal range of a data set, things like this. And then again, to customize workflow and policy rules and pull it all together, there's development services. And then lastly, at the bottom level there are managed services or hosting services around those network storage and compute options and how you carve all that up. So having given you that conceptual architecture, I thought I'd jump in and show you one that we prepared earlier. So this is a project we've been working on at Link Digital for the last 3-ish years, I think. Started from a greenfields. And what you're seeing here is actually Drupal. So this is just a web experience. But wherever you're seeing data, it's being pulled from CKAN. The data catalog itself is pretty much this. So this is a faceted search or a list view with facets available to you to browse in and drill into your results. You've got typical search, you've got advanced search in terms of booleans, and going into a data set, you then get the resources. So this one's just got a single resource, and it goes through to the specific map, which in the example I was talking about is Terrier.js, which they have a separate link to, which is the Pacific map. And so this is Terrier.js is developed by Data61 here in Australia. It's using like a Cesium engine. But if I want to explore map data, this listing here is just basically pulling from CKAN all of the appropriate geospatial endpoints or resources. And this can sit on pretty much any CKAN platform. If we drill in and we have a look at this Rarotonga in the Cook Islands, we can then see the metadata, or the metadata would be coming from that particular data set in CKAN. We can add that to the map. And click to see the ideal zoom for that data set. And that's the actual endpoint that might be coming from, say, GeoServer, as an example, WMS or something like that. So that's a very quick run through of sort of like CKAN, Drupal, Terrier.js. Going back to here, I thought I'd go through data access patterns. So you might be guessing a bit of this already, but the list view for all data sets is driven by Solr. The main logical groupings is you've got organization views and you've got topic views, but essentially you're just driving into different list views, which are all being driven by the way you're entering into CKAN. So you can use simple search, advanced search, or custom search. Those then drive the user through to a dataset view, so a single dataset, and the dataset has multiple resources associated with it, but for each resource you can have a resource view as well. So for the resource types, we'll say image or zip file or data table. So that's the common access pattern for the public, and then there's some other access points for those who might be registered users. You can have user preferences set, so you can follow data sets, you can follow organizations, you can follow topics. Then there's some inherent benefits to that. You can get notifications when there's updates to those things. And then publisher role access, role associations is around access and control. So you can have you can be a member as a publisher of organizations, multiple organizations in the hierarchy, multiple topics, and you can be owner of data sets that you create and things like this. So again, using the same idea, where are the areas of opportunity or integration? For us, you can kind of see how CKAN can be used as a data catalog, but you can easily be seen as a headless data management system as well. So there's opportunity to build essentially a catalog just for the purpose of data discovery and access, just for that user-based data access, human-based, I should say, as opposed to machine-based. There's area in the publisher roles and the user preference roles, and fine-tuning that to the value that you can create for those types of stakeholders in an organization or in the public. So there's consulting, governance, workflow. And then in those resource views, there's opportunity for product integrations, particularly around visualizations and business intelligence, value points, I should say. Next one, and this will be the last of these sort of types of slides for you, and then we'll get onto some more examples. This sort of data storage patterns. So it's a Postgres database. Primarily, it's data sets associated with organizations. So the data sets will have the types of metadata you expect: title, URL, description, tags, license, organization. But using the DCAT standard, an organization can expand that for specific use cases. Typically, they'll do that because they have the intent to create particular access or discovery methods for different user stakeholders, different types of stakeholders, whether they be very technical, subject specific technical, or just the general public. Then the resources themselves will also have the opportunity for metadata, and that can be customized. You can have different types or sub-schemes for resources of different types. And then ultimately, the resources will have a storage location, and it doesn't actually have to be, owned by CKAN, as it were. It can just be an endpoint that is referenced by CKAN, so just a URL, and CKAN will then catalog that and make that endpoint discoverable through the access and discovery methods that it provides. But typically, it may have a mix of both, and then it can also, as I mentioned, you can have specific ways you might want to store images or zip files or CSV or JSON or other spatial data sets. And I still think there's a lot of opportunity for CKAN to be something almost like an orchestration engine. It was designed to be used for multiple organizations within the context of a government jurisdiction. And there's no reason you can't adapt what CKAN does in terms of the governance of organizations and the user roles and such into the technology stack as well, and then orchestrate the provisioning of different storage accounts into different platforms, whether it's platform as a service or even as simple as different buckets on AWS. S3. And then the catalog itself, in terms of the data storage patterns, it's how does it store the catalog? In terms of how it outputs the catalog, it is in Postgres, but that is then expressed under the DCAT schema via REST API. You can express it as XML, JSON, and even RDF. CKAN is not a linked data store, but it can express the catalog itself as a linked data graph, I guess you call it. And again, similar to the other slides, so there's opportunity for consulting around standards and interoperability in the way that the data sets and resources will be cataloged within an organization or a jurisdiction. There's opportunity for managed services and reseller of those services. And there's ample opportunity for systems integration in the way that the catalog can be read and used by other information systems as well, as a node in an enterprise service bus almost. So I've got some other examples. I don't mind seeing if there's questions, if we want to do it in that sort of broken up way, or I can just jump straight into some of these examples. What would you like, Neil?
If people have got questions, can you enter them into the chat, so we don't have people speaking over the top of each other? There's nothing in there at the moment. Okay. I think you'll probably get questions as you show the examples. You'll get some practical view of how this works.
Okay, so I thought I'd just throw a quick 3-tier search. So this one is for a client. We're just doing an update. It's very similar to what I showed before. So in terms of searching, the first tier is basically for a common, general anonymous type user. It's called low data literacy. So you put in a search query and it comes up with responses that would be relevant for that to help assist the user find the data sets they're looking for. Then you can go into the second tier, which would be more advanced search, where they might be doing a similar type search, but then they can have the Boolean operators or logic operators to build that search out. And then the most advanced really is, aside from custom search paths that you might design, but because it is driven on Solr or driven by a Solr index, you can actually query using Solr syntax. So that is like the third tier. For that particular example. And another one that might be interesting for folks is just a very basic example of something almost akin to data lineage. So in this example, again, it's a dev site, or maybe it's not. So we're already using we're using a Solr query to find data sets that have a parent ID that does go to something else. So this particular data set, we'll view that one. It's giving you an outline of the data set. It's for this portal, we've got quite a few sort of add-ons. So they have a data quality statement, data packages, and I think I might have, I'll try this again. Oh, there we go. I couldn't see related data sets, but so this one has related data sets. So as an example, where it's telling us where we are, which is here, but has these sibling data sets that are also related to this one. So you can then go into that one, have a quick preview of it and view the data set. And that's a hierarchical sort of visualization of it, which updates as you go. So it's now telling me that we're here on that relatedness visualization, I guess you call it. So these sort of 3 examples I'm showing at the moment are really around that data access patterns. That's where we do a fair bit of the work. We less so work on the data governance, not the data governance, but the ETL or ELT type use cases, or the data pipeline that comes into CKAN. In most cases, with the systems we integrate with, that's managed by the organizations themselves. They have a very good handle on it. And in fact, work with folks, traditionally work with data warehouses and such, or BI, or the whole tool chain associated with managing data in organizations, which is very, very mature. And then we come in as like historically data web developers coming in on the front end, and how we can improve the accessibility and the specificity of how people can access the data sets and discover them. And then this last example isn't live yet, so I don't have anything to directly show you, but for Data Western Australia, then state-based data portal, we've implemented self-learning search. So that's just bumping up the result of ranking based on the text query that's been put in and the actual clicks on certain data sets. So it's building up it's building into the Solr index of results the prior history of people discovering what was interesting to them based on the query that they used. Promoting data sets, so the result ranking of a particular data set getting increased based on the sliding scale for a particular data set, deprioritizing search within files, more relevant search results, and also, which is kind of in the other example, the Google like did you mean functionality, where you can have a mistyped query. It can still come up with a result set that is based on what it thinks you meant, so that you can actually be assisted for less literate or mistake-riddled folks doing their searches. Now, there's some other projects that we've been working on. You can actually learn more from just looking at the demo.ckan.org site. Like, this is CKAN out of the box. So if you're interested in just seeing not anything fancy, nothing that's been tweaked for a particular organization use case, just what it looks like when you download it from GitHub, then go to demo.ckan.org. Pacific Data is the example that I have gone through a little bit. There's a lot more to it though. They have like data dashboards that are all driven by CKAN, so you might have a look at that for some inspiration. Flood data is an example where we've got resources from multiple organizations going into a central data store, and the access model is based on collections, I guess. And the access control is based on those collections. So that's a little bit more like Dropbox, where you create a folder and then have access control in the folder. So we kind of built that function into that. With the Brisbane City Council, real-time data. So CKAN can take updates via API. So as I mentioned, so the typical way to set up a connection to another information management system that wants to ping CKAN and provide it with updates is to create a user for that application or that use case. And then based on the access rights it has, it can do the modifications to a data set, append resources to a data set, for example. So we've got an example of that happening here, where we've got traffic data that's coming from signaling systems, and every minute that's updating the data set on that particular catalog, amongst other data sets. Climate data portal, that's an example where, as I mentioned, there's like a climate initiative where they've got supercomputer facilities where they're pumping out projected data, which is coming from simulations of weather patterns into the future. And then they want a relatively bespoke data catalog for all the deviations and permutations of how you can cut that data up and look at it to assist with access and discovery for a fairly specialized user group. So CKAN is kind of like a pretty flexible tool for any of those quite uncommon use cases, I guess you'd say. Geoscience data portal in Queensland is of a similar type. They have particular ways that they want to catalog data, how they want to link data to essentially everything that's driven by a permit. Organizations get the permit, then they might do boreholes to sample environments, they might get rock samples, they might get a whole bunch of stuff, and everything is sort of cataloged in that particular portal against that kind of schema or ontology, I guess, in the way that it needs to be understood. Seed data portal is a collection of environmental data for all of New South Wales. One of the cool integrations on that one, if you go and have a look at it, is there's also a citizen science project. And the citizen science project is, the driver for that is to bring together folks who are volunteers who want to perform science or be involved in research projects, citizen research projects. They might become data collectors, they might be helping to identify endangered frog species or just common fauna or flora. And so the Citizen Science Project is a Drupal project that is more about membership and activation and identifying projects, but it fundamentally links back to the CKAN project in terms of when those projects are set up and designed, they have a schema associated with the collecting of data assets. And as the data is collected, it's pretty much pre-packaged in a format that is ready for the catalog. And then the last one that I'd mentioned at the start is a list of different CKAN portals. So this is a project we set up a couple of years ago. And it's based on people coming in here and entering the CKAN portal itself. Now, admittedly, I've found whenever I've come across a new CKAN portal, I've entered it in. But once entered, it's indexed. What's an interesting one? So if we look at, well, this is a relatively big one. Sometimes they re-index. So that's, there we go. So you can go into any of the portals that are listed there and actually have a look at some of the characteristics of the portal over time. So how many data sets have been added over time. There's a few minor bugs to fix in terms of the time range that's being displayed. If you're interested in how it's being built, it'll tell you what particular plugins in CKAN have been configured for this particular portal, and then against how many portals are actually using that particular data store plugin. So you can get a sense of how popular it is, which we built as a tool for developers. So the first one is a tool for platform owners. They get a sense of their own efforts of activity on their portal. The second one is for developers. And then the last one, which is just general statistics, is almost for researchers. So if you wanted to have a general sense of the content that's going into some of these portals, whether around statistics or tags, they might, that's right, because Canada is like a bilingual French-English, and I think they might not have tags set up in the way that most portals have. But yeah, I would suggest if you're interested in learning more about CKAN portals, then going to datashades.info and having a look at some of these is a good place to start. And yeah, obviously up here you can go directly to the URL of that portal. Maybe not that one. And take a look. It's because they've redirected to the Open Canada program. So the Open Data program here is, this is essentially CKAN, or once you get into the topics, once you get through to the data sets, you're then using CKAN. So again, you can start to see just the diversity of how CKAN has been implemented, but they all share the same user access patterns, essentially. And I think this is the last slide. So if you don't have any questions, get ready to pump them out. The project home on the web is ckan.org. You go check it out. It was recently updated. The project home on GitHub is there, github.com/CKAN. Documentation. So there's pretty good documentation. We've had good feedback from folks who've had to come into the project maybe for a specific use and integration. And they've been very happy with the documentation. So if you want to read the API methods or about the API methods and such, have a look. Datashades is that portal listing that I was just showing you, and my company, Link Digital, that's our home on the web. So thank you very much.